Today we're diving into a topic that blends science, psychology, and a touch of mystery: the strange effects of extreme isolation on the human body and mind. Human adaptability is fascinating, but when it comes to intense isolation, in places like outer space, deep caves, or remote regions, our bodies and minds start responding in surprising and often unsettling ways. Imagine spending months without human contact, in an environment devoid of natural light or with very limited resources. Scientists and psychologists have been studying experiences of extreme isolation to understand how the body and mind react in situations far removed from normal life. Some of this research takes place in unique locations like space stations, submarines, deep caves, and even frigid deserts. We'll break this analysis into 5 parts. First, we'll explore how isolation affects the brain and cognitive functions. Next, we'll look into the physical impacts, including cardiovascular health and the immune system. In the third part, we'll examine the emotional effects, discussing phenomena like anxiety and depression. Following that, we'll cover changes in time perception and how it's altered in isolated settings. Finally, we'll take a look at what science says about recovery after long periods of extreme isolation. Ready for this fascinating journey into the dark side of solitude? Let's dive into the complex and eerie ways that extreme isolation impacts the human body and mind. The impact of isolation on the brain and cognitive functions. Isolation and cognitive decline. The brain relies on stimulation to maintain optimal function. When isolated, especially in low-stimulus environments like caves or space stations, the brain starts to suffer from cognitive decline. Without regular social interaction and varied environments, cognitive functions like memory, focus, and problem-solving start to diminish. Studies have shown that individuals in isolated settings may experience forgetfulness and difficulty focusing, as the brain becomes less responsive to tasks. Changes in brain structure. Research suggests that extreme isolation can even alter the structure of the brain. A well-documented example comes from astronauts who spend long periods on the International Space Station (ISS). MRI scans before and after their missions revealed changes in brain matter, particularly in areas related to sensory perception and motor control. The brain adapts to the lack of gravity and social interaction by reallocating resources, but these adaptations can lead to side effects once the person returns to Earth. Decreased neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt by forming new neural connections, is also affected by isolation. Typically, neuroplasticity helps us learn and adjust to new information. However, with limited mental stimulation, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself decreases, which can impair learning and problem-solving. This effect is particularly concerning for long-term space missions, where maintaining sharp cognitive functions is crucial. Sleep disruptions. Isolation can severely disrupt sleep patterns, which further impacts cognitive health. In isolated environments, people often experience irregular sleep cycles, which might be attributed to the absence of natural light cues that help regulate circadian rhythms. This phenomenon, known as space lag for astronauts or cave lag for explorers, can lead to insomnia or hypersomnia, both of which negatively affect focus and mental clarity. The onset of sensory deprivation effects. The lack of external stimuli in isolation can lead to sensory deprivation, which affects brain function. In extreme cases, sensory deprivation can cause hallucinations as the brain attempts to fill in the missing stimuli. People in isolation, especially those in dark or monotonous environments, report seeing shapes, flashes of light, or hearing sounds that aren't there, a result of the brain's attempt to create stimulation. Physical effects of extreme isolation. In extreme isolation, especially in confined or restrictive environments, the human body begins to experience a range of physical changes that can be both immediate and long-term. One of the most notable impacts is on cardiovascular health. Isolation often means a reduction in physical activity, which directly affects the heart and circulatory system. For example, astronauts on the International Space Station deal with the effects of microgravity, which causes their muscles, including the heart, to weaken over time. This is because, without gravity's resistance, the heart doesn't need to work as hard to pump blood, leading to a decline in cardiovascular efficiency. For those in isolated environments on Earth, such as deep-sea submarines or remote outposts, the limited space can also restrict movement, causing a gradual loss of strength and endurance in the cardiovascular system. Another significant effect of isolation is on the immune system. Studies have shown that prolonged isolation, especially in environments like space, can make the immune system more vulnerable. Astronauts, for instance, often report that their immune response is weakened after extended periods in space, making them more susceptible to viruses and infections. Similarly, individuals in confined, isolated conditions on Earth experience a decline in immune function. This may be partly due to the ongoing stress that isolation brings, which raises cortisol levels in the body. Elevated cortisol levels, especially over long durations, can suppress immune function, leaving the body less equipped to handle infections or recover from injuries. Isolation can also lead to a significant loss of bone density, which is a well-documented concern for long-term space missions. Without the constant pressure and resistance that gravity provides, bones begin to lose their density, becoming more brittle and susceptible to fractures. On Earth, astronauts can lose up to 1% of their bone density per month in space, and while the situation may be less extreme for isolated individuals in Earth-bound locations, the general lack of movement and weight-bearing activity can still have a noticeable impact. For those in isolated or confined environments, the combination of limited exercise and restricted movement can weaken bones over time, increasing the risk of osteoporosis or other bone-related issues. Nutrition is another area that becomes complicated in situations of extreme isolation. In confined and remote environments, food supplies are often limited and diets are strictly controlled, leading to potential nutritional imbalances. Additionally, isolation itself can affect appetite, with some individuals experiencing a loss of appetite due to the mental stress of isolation, while others may turn to food as a coping mechanism, leading to overeating or craving unhealthy options. Over time, these changes in diet and appetite can lead to nutritional deficiencies, impacting energy levels, concentration, and even mental health. For instance, a lack of fresh fruits and vegetables in certain isolated locations can lead to deficiencies in essential vitamins, which are crucial for immune function, energy metabolism, and overall physical health. Hormonal changes also occur in response to extreme isolation, affecting both physical and mental well-being. For example, the absence of natural light in many isolated settings, such as in space or deep caves, can disrupt the body's production of vitamin D. Vitamin D is synthesized when the skin is exposed to sunlight, and it plays an essential role in bone health, immune function, and mood regulation. Without regular sunlight, vitamin D levels drop, which can have widespread effects on the body. Additionally, isolation raises stress levels, keeping cortisol, the primary stress hormone, elevated. Persistent high cortisol levels can lead to fatigue, reduced immunity, and even increase the risk of long-term conditions like high blood pressure and metabolic issues. Combined, these physical changes make it clear that the human body, while resilient, is not well adapted to long periods of isolation without significant repercussions. Emotional and psychological effects of extreme isolation. When subjected to extreme isolation, the human psyche undergoes profound shifts, many of which reveal just how dependent we are on social interaction and environmental stimulation. One of the most immediate effects of isolation is heightened anxiety, often driven by the constant awareness of confinement or the lack of control over one's surroundings. This is especially true for astronauts, who are acutely aware of the immense void outside their space stations and the limited space inside. The absence of familiar environments and social connections increases feelings of vulnerability, which can escalate into chronic anxiety as time passes. Depression is another common consequence of extreme isolation, and it often goes hand in hand with anxiety. In isolated conditions, the lack of social interaction leads to loneliness, which can profoundly affect mental health. Humans are inherently social beings, and prolonged loneliness disrupts our psychological equilibrium. This is evident in environments like deep-sea stations, Antarctic outposts, and space missions, where personnel often experience persistent sadness, irritability, and mood swings. The monotony of confined spaces with little variation can further exacerbate these feelings, as individuals begin to feel trapped in a cycle that lacks novelty and stimulation. Another psychological effect of isolation is what researchers describe as sensory deprivation stress. Isolated settings are often devoid of the rich sensory input we experience in daily life. The diversity of sights, sounds, and interactions we often take for granted. In a cave or space station where silence and stillness dominate, the mind begins to compensate for this lack of stimuli, sometimes resulting in vivid hallucinations. Individuals have reported hearing voices, seeing flashes of light, or experiencing tactile sensations that are not actually present. This is the brain's attempt to create stimuli to fill the void, and while these hallucinations are usually harmless, they can be disorienting and distressing, especially over long periods. Another profound effect of isolation is the disruption of a person's self-concept and sense of purpose. In normal settings, our identities are reinforced by social roles, feedback from others, and the regular activities we engage in. In isolation, however, these sources of identity become scarce. Over time, individuals may begin to feel disconnected not only from others, but also from their own sense of self. This phenomenon has been particularly well documented among people who have spent months in remote research stations or isolated military bases. The lack of social reinforcement and feedback creates a kind of identity drift, where people feel detached from their usual sense of purpose or motivation. Lastly, isolation can lead to an altered response to stress, sometimes called dysregulation. Under normal circumstances, stress responses are triggered by external stimuli, but in isolated environments, the body's stress response can become overly sensitive or unpredictable. People in extreme isolation often report exaggerated reactions to minor inconveniences or a growing sense of frustration over issues they would normally tolerate. This dysregulation of the stress response can lead to outbursts of anger or sadness that feel disproportionate to the situation at hand, a sign that isolation has disrupted their emotional regulation. Altered perception of time. In extreme isolation, one of the most fascinating and disorienting effects is the altered perception of time. Without regular external cues, such as sunlight, clocks, or a daily routine, the human mind struggles to keep track of time accurately. This phenomenon has been documented in environments as varied as space missions, deep caves, and Antarctic research stations. When deprived of natural light cycles and external markers, people often experience time distortion, where minutes can feel like hours, or days seem to blend into one another. Researchers believe this happens because, in isolation, the brain loses its usual reference points, creating a subjective time drift. In environments devoid of sunlight, such as in deep caves or space stations, individuals often develop their own internal rhythms, which may not align with the traditional 24-hour day. Experiments have shown that people in dark, isolated environments tend to shift towards a longer sleep-wake cycle, sometimes stretching to 30 or even 36 hours. In these cases, they might remain awake for 20 hours or more and then sleep for extended periods. This shift disrupts the body's circadian rhythms and can lead to issues such as fatigue, insomnia, or an inability to feel rested even after long periods of sleep. The altered perception of time also leads to a loss of routine, which is psychologically destabilizing. In everyday life, routines help us organize our activities and give structure to our days. In isolated environments, however, time loses its usual structure, which can lead to feelings of confusion and disorientation. Without scheduled activities or tasks, isolated individuals often report feeling lost in time, unable to distinguish between days or even weeks. This lack of structure can worsen mental health effects like anxiety and depression, as people feel increasingly unanchored from reality. Isolation can also create temporal compression, where long periods feel shorter in retrospect. Astronauts on extended missions often report that months in space seem to have passed in a blur. This effect may occur because, in environments with little change, the brain has fewer mental bookmarks to measure the passage of time. Each day feels similar to the last, leading the brain to compress these monotonous days into a shorter feeling period. This can make reintegration into normal life challenging, as isolated individuals may struggle to reconcile the extended time they spend in isolation with a compressed experience in their memory. Conversely, isolation can also lead to the feeling of time dragging. This effect is especially common in environments where individuals are deprived of meaningful tasks or human interaction. In these cases, hours may feel endless, as a lack of stimulation gives the mind little to focus on. Studies on prisoners in solitary confinement and people in isolated research stations show that the brain deprived of varied input can create an agonizingly slow perception of time. This slow passage intensifies feelings of loneliness and can lead to mental health challenges, making every hour feel increasingly unbearable. Recovery and reintegration after extreme isolation. The process of returning to normal life after extreme isolation presents its own set of challenges, both physical and psychological. After long periods of isolation, reintegration can be surprisingly difficult, as individuals struggle to readjust to social environments and everyday routines. The transition from isolated settings like space stations or deep-sea habitats to the familiar world can be disorienting and overwhelming. The brain and body, which have adapted to solitude, require time to adjust back to social interaction, environmental stimuli, and the physical demands of normal life. One of the first obstacles in recovery is reestablishing social connections and communication skills. People who have experienced prolonged isolation may find social interactions awkward or draining, as they become accustomed to solitude. Even simple conversations or crowded spaces can feel overwhelming, triggering anxiety or irritability. This difficulty with social reintegration is not uncommon among astronauts, cave explorers, and those returning from isolated military outposts. In extreme cases, the social skills of isolated individuals may become rusty, and they need time to readapt to norms, emotional cues, and the rhythms of conversation. Physically, reintegration poses challenges as well. In cases of space missions, for instance, astronauts often experience weakened muscles and reduced bone density upon return to Earth due to the absence of gravity. Physical therapy and exercise are often required to help their bodies readapt to the demands of Earth's environment. Similarly, individuals coming from isolated and confined spaces on Earth may face physical deconditioning. Muscle weakness, joint stiffness, and fatigue are common as the body adjusts to a more active lifestyle. Reinforcing cardiovascular strength and bone density often takes months of gradual exercise and rehabilitation. Psychologically, the effects of isolation can linger, sometimes resulting in long-term mental health concerns such as depression or post-traumatic stress. For many, the solitary conditions of isolation foster feelings of detachment that don't immediately dissipate upon reintegration. This is especially true for individuals who face psychological hardships, such as fear, anxiety, or hallucinations during isolation. Therapists and psychologists often work with these individuals to help them process their experiences, addressing residual anxieties or distress that may arise. In some cases, counseling is essential to help them regain a sense of normalcy and rebuild mental resilience. Reintegration also involves recalibrating one's perception of time. After experiencing time distortion in isolation, individuals may need to reestablish daily routines and adjust their internal clocks. Simple activities like keeping regular meal times, setting sleep schedules, and maintaining a consistent routine can help reset circadian rhythms disrupted by isolation. The structure that routines provide can be immensely helpful, offering a sense of stability and control that's essential for mental well-being. This gradual reintroduction to structured time helps isolated individuals reconnect with a more balanced perception of time, bringing back the regularity that was lost in isolation. Lastly, reintegration often sparks a unique sense of appreciation and mindfulness. Many individuals who endure extreme isolation report a newfound gratitude for the simple aspects of life: the sun, fresh air, physical space, and the comfort of human companionship. This renewed perspective can bring a positive outlook, but it also comes with an adjustment period. Learning to navigate both the intensity of daily life and the richness of new experiences takes patience and support from friends, family, and professionals. In the end, the journey of recovery after extreme isolation is both a physical and psychological reintegration, bringing individuals back into the world they left behind with new challenges, insights, and an appreciation for connection. This concludes our exploration of how extreme isolation impacts the human body and mind. Thank you for joining me in this journey through the depths of solitude and the science behind it. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Understanding the complex effects of extreme isolation. As we wrap up this exploration into the bizarre effects of extreme isolation on the human body and mind, it's important to reflect on the profound insights gained from studying how we adapt or struggle to adapt in such challenging environments. The human capacity for resilience is remarkable, yet extreme isolation exposes vulnerabilities that can lead to significant psychological and physical changes. From the cognitive decline and emotional turmoil to the complex shifts in our perception of time and the challenges of reintegration, we gain a clearer understanding of the costs associated with isolation. The effects of isolation are not just relevant to those who venture into outer space or explore remote caves. They resonate with broader societal implications. In recent years, the world has experienced periods of collective isolation due to global events, reminding us of the critical importance of social connections and mental health. The psychological impacts felt by astronauts and researchers in isolated environments can also be seen in individuals experiencing loneliness and social disconnection in everyday life. Understanding these effects underscores the necessity of fostering environments that support social interaction, provide meaningful engagement, and promote mental health awareness. As we move forward, we must prioritize mental well-being and resilience in all aspects of life, particularly in times of isolation or crisis. Whether through community building, support networks, or simply encouraging open discussions about mental health, we can create a culture that acknowledges the challenges of isolation and actively works toward solutions. Finally, as we reflect on the unique experiences of those who face extreme isolation, let us also consider the lessons learned from their journeys. Each story serves as a reminder of our interconnectedness and the vital role that social interaction plays in our lives. As we navigate our own experiences with solitude, let us remain mindful of the impacts it can have on our mental and physical well-being, striving always to cultivate connection, understanding, and support within our communities. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the effects of extreme isolation. If you found this topic compelling, please give a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more intriguing explorations into the mysteries of the human experience. Until next time, stay curious and connected.